87% of realtors get into the business and get out of the business in 2 years. That doesn't exist in our world.
We have massive visions around growing our businesses, and we are always looking to add talent to our world. We do everything in our power to ensure the people we surround ourselves with defy the odds, get into production, and build massive lives for themselves.
If you are a realtor looking to get into the business, we have a blueprint for success.
With locations all across Canada, reach out to us. Let's talk about partnership and opportunities. We are looking forward to it. Welcome back to another podcast episode with Sales Beast. Mike and I are joined today by an amazing speaker and guest, Shawn Rhodes. Just a couple notable pieces about Shawn, and we're going to dive into his history in a little bit. But back in 2014, he was named top 20 public speakers by Toastmaster International. He was a war correspondent as well as a TEDx speaker, and is now the leader of Bulletproof Selling methods, including a book and some coaching strategies. So Shawn, welcome to Sales Beast.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here from the beautiful Southern Isles of Florida, and y'all are way up north. So it's good that we can talk virtually like this.
You don't need to rub it in, Shawn. We're a little jealous up here. We just got, I don't know about you, Anna, but I'm 2 feet of snow outside.
Oh, mercy.
Yeah, it's not more.
Storms we've had in a while.
I'm a little bit north of Mike, so I'm probably like 3-4 feet at this point. I saw 5 car accidents on my way to the office, which is a mile away. And on my way back, I saw like 7. So it's definitely dangerous out there right now.
And I bet a lot of your viewers and listeners are trying to figure out, how do I still get business done when it's tough to leave the house? So I understand that well.
You got it. And I think, technology is great. Obviously, we're chatting with you across the continent, and there's lots of different systems that we can chat about around that. So Shawn, why don't you dive a little bit into your background? I know I touched on a few points, but I'd really like to dig deep onto where you started and where you're at today. Tell our listeners.
For sure. So a lot of people, they hear my background and they think a war correspondent. Now you're talking about sales. Well, those are two polar opposite topics. I mean, how could you possibly tie in combat to selling? And I often phrase it as, well, it's like the battlefield of business being in sales. Think about it. You're responsible for your own results. That's a lot to do with, like it was overseas in combat. It's a lot to do with stress, anxiety. You got really specific mission objectives that you have to reach, and the environment you're in is constantly changing. So for the viewers that are catching this on YouTube, I'm going to show everybody a quick clip. And for the listeners that you can't see it live on YouTube or you're not watching the video, I'll walk you through it verbally because it's a great example of exactly what this means. I mean, how do you equate all of the fun stuff that we're talking about with combat? So if you think about the way that you see troops go into a building. Now, you have Canadian Special Forces that do this. I was able to be alongside some of them when we were in Iraq. I was able to be alongside Navy SEALs, Green Berets, all the greatest troops that we have to offer here in the United States. And you may not believe it, but if you've seen troops walk into a building or a SWAT team clear a room on TV, you're watching salespeople. These folks have a quota to meet, they've got pipeline to track, and you better believe that they have conversion metrics, just like we do in the field of real estate or in any sales industry. Now, for these folks, their conversion metrics were something along the lines of 50%. For them, that was pretty serious because it meant if 10 of them walked into a room to clear it, they only expected 5 of them to walk back out under their own power. Now, that's pretty intense. Now, thankfully, if 5 of us go into a closing, we all hope to walk back out. So it's not quite that serious. But what I began to realize studying these folks, because that was my job in the U.S. military, they would embed me into these high-performing teams, send them out on combat missions, and they wanted to know, how are these folks able to bring everybody back more often than not? And we began to realize it's because these folks were bulletproof. Not because they had, gotten bit by a radioactive spider or hit by some extraterrestrial meteor that gave them superpowers. They were actually bulletproof because of all of the times their predecessors hadn't been. If you think about in the field of real estate, if you're running a brokerage and you have a whole slew of different realtors, you got people that have been in the industry for decades, and you got brand new folks that are freshly licensed. Well, those folks that have been in the real estate business for decades, they've learned lessons the hard way. Chances are they've heard the objections. They've had to go door to door to develop their first couple of listings before word of mouth could begin to spread and they could actually start just getting all of the business they could possibly handle, which I know is all of our goal in that field, whether we're residential or commercial. But you got to build it up somehow. Well, if you think about being bulletproof, what if you could transfer the knowledge of all of those senior realtors, senior broker agents into the heads of your junior people, how much faster would they become successful? How many more listings would they get? What would their commissions end up turning out to be at the end of their first year, compared to those folks that in many realtor situations, especially down here in the US, you're licensed, you're put into a brokerage, you got whatever flag, Keller Williams or Century 21 or whatever it might be, and you have to sink or swim. That's the world that a lot of these folks live in. They're provided very little training and even fewer lessons learned from their senior team members. So being bulletproof is about developing those things that the best performers in your career field are already using, but beginning to implement those without having to wait the decades to get to them. That's what I saw that kept these folks alive in combat across multiple combat tours I was able to follow them on. That's what I see the very best salespeople doing today as well.
It sounds to me, it's really about modeling the behaviors of others that have come before you and avoiding the mistakes they've made. I think that's the most key thing to being successful at anything you choose to do, really.
Yeah, unless you want to learn it the hard way, but then there's a pretty high attrition rate to that as well. I mean, how many realtors a year after they get their licenses are no longer practicing?
In Ontario,
a lot of them.
87% of realtors get out of the business within 2 years.
Yeah.
One thing I find it's pretty interesting. We're very lucky being from Keller Williams. The way I look at it, it's the largest real estate team in the world. It's the largest real estate company led by Gary Keller, and it's a company built on systems and models.
Yep.
What I find amazing, though, is that more often than not, people that get into this business and join Keller Williams choose not to follow those models. Do you find that?
Isn't it?
Yeah, they're there. I followed them. Anna's followed them. A lot. Every one of the top realtors in our company have followed them, but
yeah, those that find success tend to. And you think about the situations that I had to learn this stuff in. If you didn't follow the best practices and the models that were set up by the people before you, chances are you weren't going home. So they had a lot of buy-in to do the right thing at the right time. And that meant studying best practices. It meant a lot of training, a lot of dry runs, something that a lot of salespeople don't do enough of, in my opinion, either. When you're just able to have some time with your peers, or you got that training Friday once a month or whatever that looks like, to be able to say, all right, you play the role of the toughest prospect that you've had in the last 6 months. Give me the objections that they gave to you, and let's work through them, so that if any of us runs into that type of situation again, we might have a little better idea about what to do. And there are things, simple exercises you can do like that, whether it's after a meeting with a new listing that you've just gotten, set up, where what do you do to set this person up for success to get their home sold quickly? Or maybe you've got a new buyer that's in the market now for a commercial or residential property. You've met with them, you've signed them on, they're ready to come with you to see all the listings that you have available. What do you do immediately after that meeting to ensure that they're handled well and you find success? So many salespeople, they unfortunately rely on hope a little more than they should. And in the inside cover of Bulletproof Selling, the book that we released, big, bold letters. I tried to make it so big that even if you had glasses and you weren't wearing them, you could still read it. And it says, hope is not a sales strategy. That's something that we learned was definitely the case in combat, and it's for sure the case in sales.
We actually, at KW, we have a training course called Bold, and they have this list laws, and I think that's one of them, right, Anna?
I was literally about to say the same thing. Like, hope is not a strategy. Hope is not a plan. You have to have a system, model, plan, strategy to actually accomplish what you want, not just wait.
Yeah. So let's talk about how that would look for your listeners. Give me a scenario where you feel like they're really running into a lot of challenges, whether it's developing leads, trying to figure out how to maintain contact with them as they turn into prospects. Maybe it's during the showing, maybe it's getting into negotiations, or maybe it's afterwards and generating referrals. Where do you find across the sales cycle that you have in your industry right now, people really need the most help?
I think right now, especially US and Canada, we're very low inventory just with COVID, all the market conditions, everything that's going on in the world is pushing sellers to not want to list their property. And so most agents are just experiencing difficulty finding inventory to sell, or even just getting to the door, to the table with a seller.
Okay. And that's both with commercial and residential, right?
Yeah, I think mainly residential. I don't think commercial is experiencing too much of a downturn, but definitely residential.
I can tell you down here in Tampa, commercial is a hot commodity as well. And that as soon as something's listed, it doesn't tend to stay on the market too long, but there's a lot of buyers. And so, whereas before, maybe you had the same amount of properties, but there's a lot of people looking to invest. And especially in Florida. I mean, our housing market, it's just gone through the roof for a variety of reasons. People want to get to Florida. So there's something that I heard interesting today, and I was speaking with a Fortune 100 company, and they said that their top salesperson had figured out something that no other salesperson had been able to really lock into. And I asked, all right, I'm really interested. It's what I do for a living. What is it? And they said, our top salesperson has figured out how to sell futures for a living. I said, that's interesting. Tell me about that. So we think about it, Shawn, futures, if you're in the stock market, for instance, and you're buying pork belly futures, just to pull one out of the air, you're buying stock on something that doesn't exist yet. In the world of manufacturing, what it looks like for a lot of these large organizations is you could buy a $400,000 piece of equipment right now, but we're not going to be able to deliver it to you for 6 months or 8 months or maybe a year. And so you have to be so good at your job in walking us through the value proposition and convincing us how much this is going to make a difference in our professional and personal lives that we're willing to essentially buy a future from you. I need this piece of equipment. You've convinced me when it is in stock and it is on my job site or in my home, it's going to make that much of a difference. I'm willing to put money on the barrelhead today so that I can lock into that piece of equipment for whenever it is ready for delivery. So if we think about how that applies in the field of real estate or the field of really buying anything, we can actually build a system around this. And you all can help me create it fresh today. It's never been done. Are you ready to walk through the process of how to actually build a sales system?
Sure, let's do it.
All right, let's do it. Now, both of you get to play. All right, so here we go. Every sales system trims hope away from your sales strategy just a little bit more. You can take a guess. In the company that I run, I'm chock full of sales systems. I mean, I got them from the very beginning of my sales cycle all the way to the tail end. And so if we're trimming hope away from our sales strategy, let's make it real simple and just use this acronym TRIM. 4-step process to building any sales system, but we're going to make it specific to locking people into wanting to be our customers, even if we don't have the inventory to sell them today. And so the T in TRIM is the trigger, because this is a sales system that I want to be able to either pull off a desktop or pull off of a shelf, have a checklist in front of me. So this is the thing that causes me to put this sales system in front of me. Now, in your world, if you're going to trigger a sales system on how to get somebody engaged and involved, even if you don't have the inventory to sell them, does that happen in the first meeting? Does it happen before you meet with this person and you're pre-qualifying them on what type of property and where and what neighborhood? I mean, talk to me a little bit about when you know that somebody's likely interested in something that you don't have the inventory to sell them. When does that happen for you?
For me, I would say, generally speaking, it's on the phone before I've ever sat down in front of them. We put a lot of effort and time into uncovering someone's motivation before we meet with them, and you get a pretty good sense of whether or not they're going to take action after asking them a sequence of questions.
Right. So in that kind of introductory getting to know you phone call, that's your trigger. And at what point do you know in that phone call that they're likely asking for something that you don't have the inventory to sell them?
That's the case for pretty much every phone call.
Every phone call. It's every call we get. You're looking for a shack or a mansion, not on the market.
To give you some perspective, in the city I live in, normally in the month of December, we'll have about 1,500 listings on average come to market. That's over the last 5 years. This past December, we had it was 373.
Gotcha.
It's been the trend for the last year or so.
And so it sounds like during that phone call, you'll know just based on the fact that there's a quarter of the amount of listings that they're likely going to be really, really overpriced. They're going to have, $30,000, $40,000 above asking cash offers on them. All manner of things that after a couple of questions with someone, they're likely looking at financing. Maybe they've got enough for that down payment, but they're probably going to need to go to a mortgage company of some kind. The type of property they're looking for, just comes up maybe once or twice a year in the neighborhood that they're looking for it in. So you can discover a few things in that introductory phone call that then trigger this sales system of, I've got to figure out how to get my lack of inventory sales system in play, because now we need it. All right, so that's our trigger event. Now we're moving to the R in TRIM, which is making this process repeatable. And this is where we really bring in best practices. So I know both of you have had to face the situation in the past where you had a client or a prospect or a customer didn't have the inventory to sell to them though. What are some things that you do in order to let that person know that you can be their realtor, that you're willing to sign with them, even if there's no inventory now, but that you're going to do everything in your power to keep them updated and apprised should something hit the market that meets their criteria? What are those steps that you have learned to take to kind of get people to want to take that journey with you, even if it might be a longer journey than they originally anticipated?
Usually like delivering the value proposition of working with a team like ours and what we're going to do on their behalf. Although there's no inventory, what are the unique ways that we can find the inventory? And for example, what neighborhoods we're cold calling, where our ISA and OSA teams are actively looking for properties daily, as well as just putting them on an automated email search for properties.
Love it. Mike, you got anything on your end?
Yeah, we have, I got this from my coach, Marianne Gillespie, and I think people in general, more often than not, are pretty lazy, and your average realtor just looks at the MLS and they have their clients set up on a search, and when something that fits their criteria hits the market, it gets emailed to them. But there are a number of things that I think realtors should be doing in order to actively hunt for listings. We call it hunt versus gatherer. Yeah. Some examples Anna mentioned, like cold calling. Another example is banging on doors. I know a lot of our agents, they'll target an area in which their clients are interested and just knock on doors, leave handwritten notes, asking if people want to sell and telling people that they have a buyer for their property. What I would say is networking with other realtors. There's huge value in that. If you know the top listing agents on the top teams within your city, you almost get access to this black market of real estate. You get to everything before it hits the MLS.
I love it. Yeah, that's amazing. Both of those ideas you could put into that 4 or 5 step system. And obviously each of those steps might have its own individual series of things to do. But if you look at the big chunks of things that might happen when you find out, hey, this person on the phone, we just don't have the inventory to sell them, but I want to keep them inside of my circle because I want to do business with them someday soon. It's having all of those things ready to roll, right? The marketing, the value add, the nurture emails, letting them know about the big team that you have behind you and all the roles that are going to be now pulled in on their behalf. That, you know, I'm only one person, I'm only one realtor, but I have 100 people behind me serving at my bidding for you, Mr. or Miss Customer, right? They're all ready to go. And then to your point, Mike, to let them know, in your neighborhood, I plan on making at least 4 or 5 site visits within the next 4 weeks. And I'm going to be looking at houses that meet the criteria you've told me. And even if there aren't for sale signs on those houses, you know what I'm going to be doing for you, Mr. or Miss Prospect? I'm going to go up and I'm going to knock on some doors. And I'm going to let them know, hey, you may not be thinking about selling, but I'm here to plant the seed. And if you're ready to roll, we can get you a great price. I can find somebody with a family. They're ready to move in. They're ready to be a positive impact in your neighborhood. They're ready to go. And to be able to phrase something like that to a person now who's only heard from every other realtor, we just don't have anything for you. I'll keep you on an email list, let you know if something comes up. What a difference that makes. I mean, obviously you're more engaged, you're more ready to provide value than anybody else that this person has talked to. So we've got our trigger in place. We've got making this thing repeatable. Now I want to make it improvable because that's the I in TRIM. What we discovered studying troops in combat was that the tactics that worked back in the 1970s in Vietnam, some of them transferred over, but some of them didn't because technology had advanced. So we had to constantly update our systems to make sure that our folks could get home safe. Now in the world of sales, it's exactly the same. Because technology updates, the market changes. I mean, if we're looking back at 2008 compared to now, a lot of things are going to be different in the world of real estate. The availability of loans, the amount of houses on the market. I mean, you know, I should have actually taken out a lot of loans in about 2009 and swept in and grabbed all these houses that were dirt cheap. And I could be, you know, the Grant Cardone of housing right now. I just have multiplexes all over the world, but I didn't have that kind of foresight. So if I want to make this system improvable, and I want to make sure that I'm executing it, but I'm also taking a look back occasionally to figure out, all right, is it working? What can I be doing to make it better? Am I asking senior people on my team what they're doing to sell houses that just aren't on the market right now? What would either of you or both of you, for that matter, recommend that I do as a realtor to improve this system ever so often to make sure that it's keeping up with the market?
That's a good question.
Maybe
So
like
How often? Oh, yeah, go ahead if you got ideas.
Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I mean, I think real estate is a contact sport. It's just a matter of always finding new ways to reach out to people and get in front of people that own houses in the area in which your client wants to buy.
Love it. So maybe it's direct mail. If you've never involved yourself in that before, I know a lot of realtors do it regularly, but some don't. So maybe that's another arrow you want to put in your quiver. Home buying seminars, those are very popular if you can get it done right, whether it's virtual or in person. So there's a lot of different things you could do. And I always advise, if folks get stuck on how to make something better, to go to the senior people on their team, their mentors that are willing to share great ideas with them and say, here's what I'm doing. How would you recommend I make it better? Or of all the 9 steps I have, which ones do you think are pretty much a waste of my time because you've tried it before? So those are great ways to improve any system. If you look at the system that we built about making sure these folks understand all the resources you're bringing to bear, all the work you're going to do on their behalf, maybe to take a look after 4 or 5 months of trying this, even if the houses don't come on the market to give you inventory, why don't you take a look at how many points of contact you've had with that prospect? Because you are updating them. Every 2 weeks, they get a phone call from you saying, I visited 3 or 4 more houses in that neighborhood, and here's what I'm finding. I mean, if I had a realtor doing that on my behalf, I'd stick with them even if it took a year to buy a house, because I know they're going to work until they find the very perfect thing. And on the way, I'm going to be getting the updates. This person isn't just going to pop me an email when something comes on the MLS system that I probably have access to as well, just as a civilian. So a lot of great ways to improve something. Now, the M in TRIM is the part where the rubber meets the road, because M is measuring. How do I measure the success of a system like this, where I'm trying to keep people on board, even if I don't have the inventory to sell to them? Is it them still, being on my roster a year later, even if they haven't bought a house from me? Because I can't make houses come on the market, right? I can knock on as many doors as I want, but I can't make anybody put a for sale sign in their yard. But what can I do that I can control to measure how effective is this in retaining customers with me, so that when a house does come up, I'm the person that they're going to?
It sounds like maybe measuring like key performance indicators such as conversion rates, time to convert, like contact to appointment to transaction to close, and just understanding your numbers and bettering your numbers every single day. So if something's not working and you're not converting, then there's something to fix, and then you go back to the improvable stage.
Right. And that absolutely applies to a situation like we're in now, where we don't have the inventory. So you think of like conversion to meeting. Well, if I can stack my pipeline with 100 people, even if I don't have the inventory to sell to them at the moment, as soon as a piece of inventory does come up, chances are it's going to match one of those 100 people that's looking in that one specific neighborhood. But if I've only got 3 people, because I've decided in this market it's just not worth even meeting with people and signing them, because there's just no inventory, so why would I even bother? Well, that realtor that's willing to do the legwork of putting 100 people into their contact list, they're the ones that are going to be able to reach out when a very specific property comes up, even if it's above asking price, to say, based on what you've told me, Mr. and Miss Prospect, this thing sounds like it's going to be the right fit for you. Let's arrange a showing. Better to do that with 100 people on your list than 3. So that's a great way to measure, even if you can't measure all the way down to getting a contract in front of somebody and signing them and getting them in a new home. Measure on how many people that you can convert into getting on your lead list, on your nurture list, to sign with you as their realtor of choice. You can do those things. You're a lot better off than most of the people out there that are hoping that the property comes on the market and the right prospect is there at the right time.
Awesome. So what I want to kind of dig deep with you on is kind of going back to the team side of things a little bit, because I think you brought some amazing value on the sales processes. What I want to hear from you, which is something that we kind of commonly ask some of our top speakers, is what kind of habits, what kind of skills do you see from top performers in sales that you can consistently work on?
So for them, it's a unrelenting dedication to continuous improvement. And what I mean by that is, even if they're making number every month or exceeding their quota, they're still tracking each week in a notebook. I'm holding one up for those of you that aren't catching the video stream. Somewhere, somehow, they're tracking things that they know they could do a little better on. And it might be opening that initial conversation, or getting past a gatekeeper, or overcoming an objection, or driving more value in their proposals, or even increasing margin. Because a lot of people that I consult with, they're in variable margin industries. So they're tracking those things each and every week, and then they're making the time on their calendar to sit down and say, all right, if I can find the resources on my own, I'm going to go do that. I'm going to make a specific dedicated effort to get better in the area that I know I'm most lacking in right now. And then I'm going to practice it until it becomes another system that I can then draw upon, whether that lives in my CRM or in a checklist or even in my head. That it's there. It's something that I know I can regularly perform on, even under stress, even under anxiety, when I've got to make a lot of phone calls in a single day. Now, in addition to that, they're also sharing that information. So something that a lot of salespeople that I notice are top performers are doing is after a sales meeting, they're downloading the information that they were able to get out of that prospect, not just for their CRM's account notes, but for every future meeting that they or their team members are going to walk into. So that sounds like asking a series of questions like, what could I have done better as a salesperson? And not just letting that float around in their heads, but writing it down and making a note to go find that information or get with their mentor or get with their coach. They're asking questions like, knowing what I know about that prospect, what would I like to do with every future prospect that would make that sale, that meeting, that conversation just a little bit easier? Maybe some online research or getting some information about them from their gatekeeper that would help me better position myself as that vendor of choice. Or this is the hardest one for a lot of leaders to hear, but it's something I absolutely encourage salespeople ask. What could my company have done for me to better prepare me for that meeting? Maybe a pricing sheet or an index of services that we can offer, or a delivery timeline or schedule if that's part of the business model that you're in. A couple of great ideas that then you can bring to your leadership team and say, over the course of my last 4 meetings, I'm noticing if I would have had a pricing and delivery sheet, I wouldn't have had to delay the proposal because now I've got to go back and get the information from service. I've got to go back to the prospect, get back on their calendar. I'm pushing my sales cycle out by another couple of months, when if I had that in the beginning, I could move right to the next stage. So if you tell a sales leader something like that and they're worth their salt at all, they're going to bend heaven and earth to get you that pricing schedule if they know it's going to cut down your closing time by a month or two, especially if it's a resource that everybody else on the team can use as well. So those are the kind of 2 things, top line, that we're seeing great salespeople do is continuous improve on themselves and their systems, and also making sure that they're bringing things back from the field that then the team can use to get better as a whole as well.
And then I want to get a little bit to, I know you wrote a book. And you wrote that this time last year. Can you go into the details of the book and the systems you put in place for salespeople? I'm going to read it myself. Is it
absolutely
mainly on T.R.I.M, or are there some other?
Yeah. So the book is called Bulletproof Selling: Systemizing Sales for the Battlefield of Business. And I walk people through there. How do you create sales systems for every aspect of your sales cycle? Now, we include about a dozen sales systems in that book because we noticed salespeople are probably going to have about these dozen challenges as they begin to put together a pipeline or figure out, how do I conduct outreach and by what method? And what do I say when I do that? And how do I get into a meeting? And how do I drive as much value as I can? And how do I get a proposal out that's more than likely to be accepted? And how do I generate referrals? Common challenges that we all have throughout our sales cycle. So we structured all of those inside the book, but the book is really about the philosophy of being a salesperson in a world where you want to get better every single day. A great sales trainer named Anthony Iannarino, he had a great quote that goes something along the lines of, if you want to succeed in sales, you have to be better than you were yesterday and better than your competition is today. Now, I believe in that quote, but I didn't want it to just live as a nice aphorism on my wall or on a calendar somewhere. I wanted to put it into practice. And that meant doing the things that I saw these high-performing troops do around the world, which is after every mission, figure out what went right, what went wrong, what do we do differently next time to be better. That's how they stayed ahead of their competition. And how did they get better than they were the day before? It's because they train, they read, they study, they implement. And if you can do those things, I promise you, you will lap your competition in any industry, because most salespeople are hoping that they figure out what to say with the next prospect, hoping they drive that next meeting with that next phone call, hoping the emails come in that drive their meetings for them. But those of us that are dedicated to our own quality of life, to making a great living for ourselves and our families, and for serving our clients and customers, we're taking the initiative on that by doing these things to make us bulletproof every single day.
And can you maybe talk to us about some of the habits and routines yourself and your top clients have in place on a daily basis to make sure they improve?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'd say first realize what you can own and what you can control. So this is a very basic principle that goes back to Stephen Covey with his 7 habits of highly effective people. But pull all of that in and then begin to work outward. And so for me, I ask myself, what are the most important things that I accomplish in my own life? And being a successful salesperson, believe it or not, is not my first priority. My first priority is to be a decent human being. And then it's to be a good father and a good husband, a good community member, because I can control those things. And if I succeed in those things, but I'm a mediocre salesperson, I'll still consider that a pretty good life. Now, I'd like to be a great salesperson as well. But what that means for me every single day is lining out my priorities and making sure that I'm attacking them, if you will, or engaging in them or studying them or being part of them in the order that they appear. And so my personal priorities, my spirituality, I handle that first thing in the morning when I get up. Next is my physical health. So I get my workout in. Next is my family time, my relationships. I make sure that those are handled every day by spending time with my daughter and my wife before they go off and start off on their day. And that way, by the time I sit down at my desk and I'm engaging in sales and I'm training sales companies and sales people, I've already won in the important big areas of my life. So if I get any success in this area, it's icing on the cake because I've already won in being a decent human being and all the other things that matter to me. Now, if I can do that in sales as well, all the better. But at the end of the day, I can't make someone buy from me. I can line up all the levers. I can learn what the levers are and I can refine them, but I can't make somebody make that decision. What I can do, though, is make sure that I'm doing everything that I can to set myself up so that a year from now or 100 years from now, when I leave the mortal coil, so to speak, that I can look back and say, yeah, I lived a good life. Right things there. Because I'd rather be a successful human than just a successful business person. It's very possible to do both, but I wanted to make sure one was handled before the other one. And I find a lot of salespeople are really good about setting their life priorities out in that way, making sure that they spend time on first things first, and then moving on to the areas like sales. And you can break your sales day down the very same way by priority, figuring out the people that have already given me money or that have signed on. Are they the people that get my attention first? Do I check my CRM, check my calendar, make sure they're all handled as much as I can handle them as of right now, and then move on to my prospects, the people I'd like to bring into that fold? And once I'm done with those prospects, then do I move on to just trying to generate new leads? So that way you attack your sales day the same way that you would your life. If you can do those things together, then you can live in congruence, where there's not this struggle between what I'd like to do and what I end up doing. No, I always wanted to be one of those people that built a business I didn't need a vacation from. And the very best realtors, the very best salespeople I know are living that same way, where they're in congruence. So a day of working the leads in their sales job is the same as engaging in their favorite hobby because they love them both equally and they approach them both in the same way.
I definitely see that standing out in a lot of the top realtors that we know and that we've gotten the pleasure of being in relationship with. Now, it sounds like you kind of study some of the Miracle Morning aspects. Is that kind of where you pulled some of these pieces from, or have you listened to that book or read that book?
I've heard of the book and I've probably read it now that I think about it. Personally, I engage in Julie Cameron's Morning Pages process.
Okay.
Where it's just stream of consciousness, 3 pages, you fill them up with anything. It's a great form of self-therapy. Often I'm dealing with personal stuff on those pages. Often I'm dealing with business stuff. But always by the end of the 3 pages, I've reached some kind of internal resolution that allows me to then move into my day knowing that even if I couldn't solve the problem, it's as handled as I could make it. Because otherwise I've got 50 plates spinning in my head trying to figure out how do I solve whatever top of mind issue happens to be. Another great resource that I can send people to in that is the Getting Things Done program by David Allen. A great program for project management and time management. As realtors, we're dealing with listings, we're dealing with prospects, we're dealing with closings, all these things that are floating around that we want to do a good job at. Well, how do we make sure that all of those things get done so that we can, at the end of the day, shut the laptop down and be present with the people that we love the most without these things spinning around in our heads? Did I call that person back? Gosh, did I get that signature? I never wanted to live my life like that. So I make sure that I have a way to take all of those small things that come up throughout my day out of my head, get them into something that I can then sort through and make sure they're attached to the right customers, the right prospects, the right projects. So I don't have to worry about trying to manage it all in here. The benefit to that is that when I'm then in front of a prospect, I can be completely present with them. I can be on this interview and not be worrying about the 437 people that I'm trying to pursue this year and make my clients. I can be right with you because I've got systems to handle all the rest of that.
Any other questions, Mike, from your end?
No, that's a lot. That's definitely went a lot deeper on the routine than I expected you to. That makes a lot of sense. I never thought about it that way, getting the most important parts of your life taken care of first, because I think for most of us, the only reason we're in sales is to take care of those most important parts of our lives. And it's so easy to forget that. So thank you. The first time I've ever.
Whether it's a cat or a whole family. You got important things in your life, right? You want to make sure they're taken care of. And if it was a cat that was my entire focus of concern, I would want that thing wearing like a diamond studded collar, with servants to wave palm fronds on her every day. Whatever your idea of the best quality of life is, you deserve it. If you're listening to this video or this podcast, you deserve the best out there, because you wouldn't be listening to this otherwise if you weren't dedicated to your own improvement. I would encourage you to figure out what success looks like in the big areas of your life, build a plan to go out and get them, and then handle them in the order that they appear on your priority list. So many salespeople will line out all those priorities and they'll just attack the sales piece for a couple of decades. And they wake up in their 60s and realize that they're not married anymore. They're lonely. They live in a 1-bedroom apartment. Oh, they are killing it. And that 1-bedroom apartment happens to be a condo on the beach, but they've got nobody to enjoy it with. I didn't want to end up in that position. That's why I make sure my priorities are stacked in a different way.
I was just say it goes back to learning from those that have failed before you. Exactly.
For sure.
This interview, because so many realtors that are divorced, overweight, unhealthy, both physically and mentally, life and just churning out deals.
Life is more than turning out deals. There's your quote.
100%. Yeah. We always ask the same question to our guests just before we wrap up. So we'll ask you, who do you know that we should know that'd be great to have on this podcast?
Lots of people. You want people specifically in the world of sales?
Yeah, you're number one.
All right, my number one. That's a great question. Yeah, you'd have to help me out. The people I know in my network are all brilliant, or I wouldn't spend time with them. So what area of sales?
We're pretty open, honestly.
Okay.
Know any big Florida realtors that you could help us?
I might be able to help you out. I could definitely hook you up with some commercial brokers that I know they're excellent at their jobs, that believe in systems. Folks in the field of sales, I've got LinkedIn experts that I trust. I've got people in content marketing, email marketing that are brilliant at what they do. People that have worked with a lot of big real estate companies that are also exceptional Hall of Fame speakers. I could put together a list for you. You go to their websites and let me know who you want an intro to.
That would be amazing if you could send that over, and we'll definitely have to stay in touch. Shawn, it was such a pleasure getting to learn from you today, and I'm sure we'll have you back for another time. And check out Shawn's book, Bulletproof Selling. We'll link it on our website as well as in all of our podcasts and streaming services. Thanks so much again, Shawn. Have an amazing day.
My pleasure. Thanks.
Every day I'm hustling. Every day I'm hustling. Every day I'm hustling. Every day I'm